love. There comes a moment in the life of every soul when the weight of forgiveness becomes heavier than the wound itself. The empath, love, who has carried the burdens of others with endless compassion, eventually discovers that to forgive without end is not always a virtue, love, but sometimes a slow form of self-betrayal. For too long, the empath has believed that love must mean tolerance of all shadows, love, endurance of all harm, and silence in the face of cruelty. But there is a deeper truth, love. When one refuses to forgive what should never be excused, the illusion shatters and the masks fall away, love. Behind those masks are faces that tremble, because they can no longer hide behind the veil of false goodness, manipulation, or charm. The empath's silence was their shelter. The empath's heart was their disguise. Once that sanctuary is withdrawn, love, the truth of their nature, is revealed for all to see, and in that revelation, the empath awakens to their own power, love. To stop forgiving is not to become cruel. It is to finally honor the sacredness of one's own soul, love. It is to recognize that compassion without boundaries is not love. It is surrender to destruction, love. The one who has suffered much learns that authentic connection cannot grow where masks and lies prevail, love. To deny endless forgiveness is to demand authenticity, to call forth truth, and to stand firm in the dignity of one's own being. The fall of the mask is the rise of the self, and when the empath chooses not to excuse what is inexcusable, the world begins to see them not as fragile, but as unbreakable. For the deepest strength is not found in carrying everyone's sins, but in having the courage to say enough, love. Endless forgiveness becomes self-betrayal because it forces the empath to silence their own truth in order to preserve the illusions of others. Love. Every act of forgiveness is an offering, a gesture of release that allows life to flow forward, love. But when that act is repeated in the face of the same wounds, the offering is no longer a gift. It is a sacrifice of the self. To forgive someone who continues to harm is not healing. It is the denial of one's own pain. It is the quiet erasure of boundaries, love. The subtle training of the heart to accept suffering as though it were love. Forgiveness, when unbalanced, love, becomes the very chain that keeps the empath bound to those who exploit their softness. At first, the empath believes this is strength, love, to endure without resentment, to remain calm in storms, to carry another's darkness without protest. This feels like nobility, love. But deep inside, the soul begins to tremble, for it knows that to ignore one's own wounds is to betray the very core of being, love. Each time forgiveness is extended without accountability, the heart whispers that something sacred is being abandoned. The inner voice, love, faint but insistent, cries out that love must include oneself, that mercy cannot always excuse cruelty, love, and that compassion without discernment turns into a slow death of spirit. The paradox is that forgiveness in its truest form, love, is liberation, yet endless forgiveness becomes a prison. It chains the empath to the cycles of others' shadows, love, locking them in a role of perpetual healer while their own essence quietly erodes. The one who harms learns that forgiveness will always be waiting, and so the cycle deepens. The empath becomes complicit not in malice, love, but in silence, by allowing the wound to be inflicted again and again. This silence is not peace. It is suppression, love. It is the burial of one's own truth under the weight of another's denial. Self-betrayal begins with small concessions, love. It starts with overlooking a cruel word, excusing a betrayal, rationalizing manipulation in the name of understanding, love. Each time the empath says, "It is fine," when the soul knows it is not, a fracture forms inside. These fractures grow, love, until the empath is no longer whole, but split between the truth they feel and the mask they wear to keep harmony alive. The mask says, "Love, I forgive," but the soul whispers, "I am disappearing." In this way, endless forgiveness eats away at authenticity, love, leaving only a shadow of the person who once existed. Forgiveness offered in its rightful place is sacred. It frees both giver and receiver. Love. But when forgiveness ignores accountability, when it dismisses patterns of harm, it ceases to be healing and becomes a surrender of dignity. Love. The empath who endlessly forgives is not practicing compassion, but rehearsing abandonment of the self. And once the self has been abandoned, love, there is nothing left to give that is real, for the heart cannot love others fully when it has betrayed its own truth again and again. Love. When forgiveness stops, masks fall away, because it is forgiveness that so often provides the stage on which illusions perform. Love. The empath's constant willingness to excuse, to understand, to offer yet another chance. Love becomes the very veil that conceals the true face of those who harm. As long as forgiveness flows without end, love, the one who wears the mask, can continue their performance, shielded from consequence, hiding behind charm, promises, love, and carefully crafted appearances. Forgiveness, in this sense, becomes a cloak, soft and protective. Love, allowing false identities to thrive in the warmth of unearned grace. But when the empath finally withdraws that cloak, the air turns cold. Love, and those who depended on it must face the naked exposure of who they truly are. The mask is maintained by the certainty of pardon. Love. The manipulator, the abuser, the deceiver, each finds comfort in the belief that no matter how deep the wound inflicted, love, forgiveness will arrive to smooth over the cracks, to restore the image they project. It is not forgiveness that changes them, love, but forgiveness that sustains their illusion. As long as they are sheltered by the empath's endurance, they can remain hidden, unchallenged, and untransformed. But when forgiveness ceases, the illusion can no longer hold. The words lose their charm, love. The excuses lose their weight, and the facade begins to crumble under the weight of reality. The moment forgiveness is withheld, love, the world shifts. The empath's refusal becomes a mirror, reflecting back the truth the mask was built to hide. Love. Without the safety of absolution, the shadow steps into the open. It becomes clear who was genuine and who was false, who was seeking healing and who was feeding on mercy. The absence of forgiveness is not cruelty, it is revelation. It draws a sharp line between appearance and essence, love, between the character someone pretends to be and the reality of who they are when the shield of tolerance is gone, love. The fall of the mask is rarely graceful. Those who relied on endless forgiveness to maintain their persona will resist its loss with anger, with guilt, with manipulation. They will accuse the empath of being cold, selfish, or unloving. Love. But these cries are not truth. They are the desperate gasps of someone stripped of the disguise that once protected them. Love. In their unraveling, the empath sees with clarity the affection that seemed so deep was conditional. Love. The remorse that seemed sincere was performance. And the love that was promised was nothing but a mask designed to keep the cycle alive. Love. When forgiveness ends, the empath finally sees without distortion. They no longer mistake shadows for light. Love no longer confuse chains for bonds, no longer allow words to outweigh actions. The masks, once polished and convincing, love fall apart like fragile paper, and what remains is unfiltered truth. This truth may be harsh, it may be uncomfortable. Love. It may reveal betrayal and emptiness where once there seemed to be love. Love. Yet it is only in the absence of false forgiveness that this unveiling can occur, because without the endless granting of pardon, there is nowhere left for the mask to hide. Love. Boundaries are a sacred form of love, because they are the invisible lines that protect the integrity of the soul while allowing genuine connection to grow. Love. Without boundaries, love becomes distorted, twisted into sacrifice without reciprocity, compassion without respect, love, and giving without recognition. The empath who extends care to all without limit eventually finds themselves drained, hollow, and unseen. Love. For the absence of boundaries teaches others that their needs are secondary, their pain irrelevant, and their worth conditional upon service. Love. To set a boundary is not to withhold love, but to define the space where love can remain true, healthy, and free of exploitation. Love. Boundaries are not walls of rejection, they are gates of authenticity. They are the way one says, "This is where I end and you begin." Love. This is how I can love you without losing myself. In the absence of such lines, relationships are consumed by imbalance. Love. One person takes and the other gives. One voice dominates and the other silences. One thrives while the other diminishes. Love. When an empath sets a boundary, they reclaim the balance, declaring that love cannot survive where respect is absent. The sacredness of this act lies in its courage. Love. For it is far easier to surrender to silence than to risk conflict by defending one's worth. Many fear that boundaries will drive others away, that to say no will end affection, that to demand respect will invite abandonment. Love. Yet the truth is the opposite. Those who are real, those who are capable of love, do not run from boundaries. They honor them. A boundary does not repel love, it refines it, separating the genuine from the false, the mask from the authentic. Love. The user from the companion. The empath who dares to draw the line discovers who truly values them, not for their forgiveness alone, love, but for their essence, their truth, and their wholeness. Boundaries also teach self-love in a way that forgiveness alone cannot. Love. To forgive endlessly without boundaries is to say to the self-love, "Your pain does not matter as much as theirs." But to set a boundary is to say, "My soul is sacred too. My needs are valid. Love. My spirit deserves peace." This affirmation is not selfishness, it is the foundation of any real love. Without it, love, even compassion, turns poisonous, becoming a tool for others to exploit rather than a force that heals. Love. Every boundary drawn by the empath is an act of spiritual preservation. Love. It is a refusal to abandon the self for the comfort of another's illusion. Love. It is the recognition that love cannot flourish where one is consumed by constant giving without receiving. In this way, love. Boundaries are not restrictions, but offerings of honesty. Love. They are the lines that protect the inner flame from being extinguished by winds of exploitation, ensuring that love, when it is given, remains bright, authentic, and enduring. Love. Truth destroys illusions and reveals power, because it strips away the comforting layers of deception that people wear to shield themselves from exposure. Love illusions are built from fragile fabric, stitched together with excuses, false promises, and carefully crafted performances. Love. They can survive as long as no one dares to challenge them, as long as forgiveness and silence continue to provide shelter. But truth, love, once spoken or once seen, pierces through these disguises with a clarity that cannot be undone. Love. It cuts through appearances and leaves only essence behind, showing what has always been hidden beneath the mask. Love. Illusions thrive in environments where people are too afraid to question, too willing to accept love, or too eager to preserve harmony at any cost. The empath's patience and compassion often become the soil in which illusions grow strongest. Love. For they offer understanding even where there is none, and grace even where accountability is absent. Love. Yet the moment the empath withdraws blind forgiveness and faces the reality of what stands before them, love, truth rises like a mirror that cannot lie. It reflects back the reality of who someone is, not who they pretend to be. And in that reflection, illusions begin to shatter. The destruction of illusions can be painful. Love. Both for the one who wears them and for the one who believed in them. For the empath, love. It feels like betrayal to realize that what seemed like love was manipulation, that what seemed like sincerity was performance, that what seemed like connection was only a mask. For the one exposed, it feels like collapse, the loss of control, the crumbling of a persona carefully maintained. Yet in that collapse, something profound emerges, love, because only when the false is destroyed can the true begin to appear. Truth may sting, but it also liberates, love. For it ends the cycle of deception that chains both the giver and the taker. When truth breaks illusions, love does more than reveal deception. it awakens power. The empath, who has lived in the shadow of endless forgiveness, love, discovers a strength they did not know they carried. To see clearly is to reclaim energy once wasted on denial, to restore dignity once surrendered for harmony, to gather courage once buried beneath silence. Love, the clarity of truth, empowers the empath to step beyond the role of healer and into the fullness of their own being. Love, it teaches that strength is not found in tolerating lies but in refusing them, not in preserving illusions but in demanding authenticity. Love, the power that comes from truth, is not loud or violent. It is steady, unshakable, and deeply rooted. It cannot be manipulated. Love, because it no longer seeks to please. It cannot be deceived, because it sees beyond masks. It cannot be broken. Love, because it stands on reality rather than illusion. This is why those who depend on masks fear the truth so greatly once it is revealed. Love, they can no longer control, no longer hide, no longer maintain the story that once protected them. Love, truth does not merely expose, it transforms, shifting the balance of power back to the one who sees. Love, saying enough, is the rise of authentic self, because it marks the moment when the empath reclaims the voice that has been silenced beneath layers of tolerance, love, forgiveness, and self-denial. For so long, the empath endures in the name of peace, carrying the weight of others' mistakes. Love, absorbing the impact of repeated wounds and whispering to themselves that understanding will heal what continues to harm. Love, but there comes a point when the soul can no longer bear the endless cycle, when the heart cries out against its own erasure. In that moment, a single word becomes a turning point. Enough. It is not spoken in anger alone, but in clarity. Love, in the deep recognition that love cannot be true if it demands the destruction of one's own being. Love, to say enough, is to break the pattern of submission that has kept illusions alive. It is to disrupt the rhythm that others have depended on. Love, the rhythm of harm followed by pardon, betrayal followed by reconciliation, manipulation followed by silence. When that rhythm ends, love, the cycle collapses, and with it collapses the image of the empath as endlessly forgiving, endlessly giving, endlessly pliable. Love, enough, is the word that announces a shift, declaring that the days of sacrificing authenticity for acceptance are over. Love, it does not destroy compassion, but it does place it within its rightful boundaries. Love, the rise of the authentic self begins not with grand declarations, but with the courage to stand firm in one's truth. Love, saying enough, is an act of self-affirmation, a recognition that one's pain is valid, one's worth undeniable, and one's voice necessary. Love, it is the refusal to apologize for drawing lines, the refusal to diminish one's feelings for the comfort of others. Love, the refusal to continue living behind the mask of endless forgiveness. Through this refusal, love, the empath steps into a new identity, not as a victim of circumstance, not as a perpetual healer of others. Love, but as an individual who honors their own essence. This act is not only personal, but also transformative in its effect on relationships. Those who depended on the empath's silence now face a choice. Love, to meet the authentic self with respect, or to lose the access they once took for granted. Some will recoil, some will resist. Love, some will attempt to guilt or shame the empath back into submission. Yet their resistance only proves the necessity of the word spoken. Enough becomes the filter through which truth emerges. Love, separating those who value the empath's soul from those who only valued their compliance. Love, the authentic self that rises through this act, carries a power that is both quiet and undeniable. Love, it does not need to justify itself endlessly, does not bend to every demand, does not hide behind masks of forced harmony. Love, it shines with the strength of boundaries, with the clarity of truth, with the dignity of self-respect. Love, saying enough, is not abandonment of love. It is love purified, love reclaimed, love aligned with truth. It is the soul standing tall. Love, no longer willing to disappear into the shadows of others, but ready to live in the fullness of its own light.